Good evening, I'm Sam Chase, your host of Chasing the Facts, and with us this evening are two of Chelmsford Public Library's employees. We have Maria Palacio, who is Assistant Director Outreach in the library, and Laura Judge, Reference Librarian. So welcome, ladies, to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. And what we like to do is start off each show by asking our guest, or in this case our two guests, to just give us a very brief biographical sketch. So if you'll start there, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Sure. Well, my name is Maria Palacio, and I am Assistant Director over at the Chelmsford Public Library. I joined the library about 15 months ago. I moved here from Florida during the pandemic at the very end of 2020. And it's been great working with all the staff there and getting to know the townspeople and the community. And I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate that. And you did the opposite of what many people do. Move south, you move north. So,
Yes.
Do you like cold weather?
I was born and raised in New Jersey.
There you
so
go. All right, that's the answer.
I'm used to it. I can't say I like it, but I'm used to it.
Okay, so Laura.
Yes, my name's Laura Judge. I work in the reference department at the library, and I've been there just about 2 years. I also started during the pandemic in August of 2020, and ever since I've worked at the library, I've been really involved in a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused initiatives and programs that we do there, which has been really great. I feel really lucky to work there and to work with Maria, and yeah, happy to be here.
Great. I have to ask you, Maria, what drew you to the area? Was it the job or was it something else?
Well, I can blame my husband for bringing us up here.
There you go.
Yes, and then the job and the opportunities to move on to the next level in my career, and
Good.
It's been fantastic, yes.
Good, great. So it was pointed out to me by Latasha Dixon, who is the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee in Chelmsford, that both of you might be interesting guests, and suggested to me that we could learn a lot more about your efforts, either within the scope of your library duties or even outside of that, as to the work of the diversity and equity efforts in town. So with that as an introduction, maybe you could give us a little bit of background and talk a little bit about the initiatives and things that you're working on in that area.
Sure. Well, as Laura alluded, she's definitely been always interested in DEI efforts in her own life and also with the library. And then the library, its recent efforts with DEI, they blossomed during our REACT grant. And now I wasn't here when we started the REACT grant, but in 2018 and 19, the Chelmsford Library embarked on a year-long project to promote civic participation and education.
Is REACT, is that an acronym for something?
It is
else?
an acronym. I was going to tell you what it means, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So the REACT grant stands for Read, Engage, and Come Together.
Okay.
And all of this information about the REACT grant is still live on our website. But during the grant, we explored 6 key issues that impact our community and our society as a whole. And through engaging programming, moderated discussions, films, readings, and resources, we covered environment and climate change, immigration and citizenship, LGBTQ+ and equality, poverty and food insecurity, racial justice, and voter engagement. And we're still doing parts of that today, a lot of that today, and it has informed our strategic planning process as well. So when we updated our strategic plan, we also included all of this in our DEI part of our plan. And we also just updated our collection development policy to ensure that we're striving toward equity, diversity, and inclusion. With that in mind, we have all kinds of things that we're doing at the library related to this. We're auditing our collection, making sure that it's diverse, that a lot of that people are seeing themselves in the books that we have available to them. So it's a really big kind of thing that we're doing with DEI, but our efforts really, we went really for it with that REACT grant and continued from there. I don't know if Laura wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak at least to some of the programs that we have at the library. One of the things that started probably, I think that now in 2021 is the ASL Conversation Circle, the American Sign Language Conversation Circle, which meets monthly, and that sort of came out of, I've been taking signing classes for a few years, and also the high school added ASL as a world language, which is really great. So there's obviously an interest in the community, so I wanted to offer a space for folks to practice that linguistic skill outside of the high school.
How long does it take to become proficient in the sign language?
I mean, I think it really depends on the person and on the context in which they're in. It's definitely best to be immersed in a deaf community, so it depends on how you're learning and who you're able to learn from. We do have a deaf tutor that facilitates the group, so that's a great privilege for the library.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're learning a foreign language, you learn it quicker by being totally immersed among people where that's their native tongue, and maybe they don't speak any English. So so that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. And we have a few English as a second language conversation circles as well, beginner and intermediate. We have a citizenship corner downstairs across from the reference desk that provides resources for anyone that's a new American or trying to get citizenship. And we also, out of the REACT grant, those topics that Maria mentioned, we built pretty extensive resource guides that are on our website. We have a landing page that basically is all the kind of topics that she mentioned. There's a specific guide for each one that lists books that you could read, films that you could watch, organizations in the area that are focused on the topics and do work towards trying to address the issues around those topics. And that's a really helpful thing for us as the reference staff too, because when someone comes in with a specific ask or a specific need, then we're able to go to those guides and then show them exactly how they can find organizations in the area that can support them. So that's really helpful.
And the Chelmsford Library is part of a larger consortium of other libraries in the area, so at least it always has been. I don't think that's changed in the last couple of years. So you're also able to direct folks to other libraries if our library may not have exactly what they're looking for.
That's correct, Sam. We're part of the Merrimack Valley Library Consortium, and so we do share resources with each other. If there's something that we don't have at Chelmsford, we can always request it from another library, and our patrons can pick it up over at Chelmsford, or if it's easier for them to go, if they're, if it's on their way to work or whatever, they can go to the other town that has it. But it works really well, that process of sharing resources together, both in print and electronically. We share resources with the consortium. So I want to kind of tying the whole thing about the REACT grant, and talking about how once the DEI committee was formed here in Chelmsford, it seemed like a natural partnership for us to work with them.
And that's been, what, about 2 years now?
They started in 2020, yes.
2020,
yeah.
okay.
And when I started here at the end of 2020, one of the first things I had to do was like introduce myself to the committee and to the chair. And at first it was a different person, and now it is Latasha. And that transition has been seamless. And that's how we got to talking about the land acknowledgement.
Now, are you both members of the committee or not?
We're not official members of we're part of a working group with the DIC.
So,
Yep.
so you liaise with them on
Yes.
a regular basis?
Exactly.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, I mean, we were always interested in working, and still are, right? Moving
yeah.
forward with the DEIC, and we have a few programs that have happened just one-offs. We also have a recurring program that's called Watch It Wednesday, where we watch a film and then there's a moderator afterwards. It's usually Carly, and she's from the DEIC, and it offers a space for the community to come together, watch a film, and then have a library staff member there if there's questions around further resources they can gain on the topics that the films are about, and then also questions that they might have for what the town specifically is doing to address the topics that the films cover. So out of that partnership, we were like, okay, what are other things that we can work on together? And the land acknowledgement definitely seemed like a good stepping point, because the DEIC has an Indigenous Working Group subcommittee as well. That's working towards Indigenous sovereignty and support. So, yeah, we've been working with them for the land acknowledgement now for
Oh, let's see.
A while.
A while, like over probably 6 months at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did a little, in preparation for the session today, I just did a little research, and because I was interested,
Sure.
especially with regard to the indigenous land acknowledgement, and I got some ethnic breakdowns of the area. And within our immediate area, which includes Chelmsford, Carlisle, parts of Acton and Concord, it looks like the population, from an ethnic standpoint, it looks like the breakdown is, and these are approximate percentages, about 74% white. And this actually surprised me, about 15% Asian. That I don't know why that surprised me, but it did. 5% Hispanic, 3% Black, and then 3% other, and this is from the 2020 census, okay, so that's where these numbers come from. And in the 3% other group, they break it down further. Now, as far as Native American or indigenous population is concerned, they say that the percentage, there are some folks here, but it's very small. They say the percentage is 0.09% of that population, so the number they gave was 39 people.
Yeah.
So have you been in contact with any of those folks, or you know, has there been any interaction with any of the Native American population within our area?
So that's a really pertinent point to make, because part of the history of New England and Massachusetts and Chelmsford is of mass atrocity and a major dispossession of land. So if you go to our website, for example, we have a landing page that discusses all about...
Can you give out the website now?
The address?
The address.
Well, it's kind of... Yeah, it's chelmsfordlibrary.org.
Okay, so if you go to if you Google Chelmsford Public Library, you're gonna.
Yeah, it's chelmsfordlibrary.org,
Okay.
and it's under our civic engagement guide. It's one of the first things listed there is the land acknowledgement, and there's a whole page that has a lot of resources on what went into writing it. But part of that is that there's historical documents that point to the people that were living in what is now known as Chelmsford, the Wamasett, and the Pawtucket on either side. They ultimately were forced to move more towards New Hampshire and then also in Canada. So I've worked with the Abenaki at Odanak and the Kewasuk Band of the Pennacook Abenaki people that's in Canada and then in New Hampshire, respectively. And it's a difficult topic because there's also a deep fracturing of indigenous nationhood because of colonization. So nations that may have been considered one thing, you know, in history are now fractured into smaller bands and spread out across the states and across New England. So in Massachusetts right now, there's the Massachusetts at Wampanoag, the Massachusetts tribe that's at Gay Head, and the Nipmuc Nation that's in western Massachusetts. And what we've found is that in conversation with the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness, which is a Boston-based organization, and as well as with a professor of history who's just recently published a book on the history of this area and indigenous peoples, Christoph Strobel, that it seems, you know, as we say in the land acknowledgement, it's the Pawtucket, Abenaki, Pennacook peoples are often grouped together because they were similar in ways and often switched between the different bands and maybe switched nations at points as well. And that's also a reflection of colonization. So when you talk about how, you know, there's maybe not a large representation of indigenous peoples in Chelmsford today, that's a direct reflection of forced removal and mass genocide.
Well, I think, you know, and we were talking a little bit before the show, you know, that I had some understanding and gotten information when I was in school that wasn't completely inaccurate. But we were told that the Indians, I grew up in the town of Concord, and we were told that the Native American folks were largely Pennacook Indians. That's what they said. But in reading beyond that, later history recently, and I do recommend the website. I actually have accessed it and seen some of the materials you have. Very good, very well done, actually. A lot of it looks to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it looks to me like a lot of the categorization of these folks into different, for lack of a better term, I don't know what the right term is, nationalities or tribe affiliation or whatever. A lot of that was done by the colonists. They made those distinctions, and you know, they might not, and I guess from what I get out of my reading is they went a lot by the language, because the languages were similar, so they just assumed, well, if this group over here is speaking Algonquin, okay, and this group is speaking Algonquin, maybe a little Slutter dialect, well, they're basically the same, but they may not have been, okay? Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what my reading tells me. All right.
And
so,
it's also often based on like place names too.
Right.
That's like another element of this, is that there's a lot of towns and street names that are named after indigenous nations or indigenous BAMs, and I think it's the case also with Wamasett and Pawtucket, is that the peoples did speak a similar language, but it was like they were on one side of the falls or the other side of the falls, so they were given separate names. So yeah, it's complicated for sure.
Well, and I think it's hard for us today to understand, because you know, with with the media that we have, and transportation isn't an issue. We can get from one end of town to the other in 10 minutes. But back in the 17th century, you know, a 10-mile trip was like crossing the country today. So I think we have to put ourselves in that historical mindset and understand, well, how is it possible that people who lived here and those people who lived 10 miles, they may be completely different. It might even be a different ethnic strain, okay? And it's just the way it was because of the circumstances of the times, you know. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But
No,
as you can tell, this whole thing interests me a lot.
It's fascinating, and that's wonderful.
does.
Yeah, and we're here to help where we can.
And that's I think that's sort of our
mission.
our intention. Yeah, go ahead.
No, to raise awareness, to help. You know, it's wonderful that you learned so much in your schooling, but that hasn't been the experience with a lot of other people.
Oh God, no.
And in fact, when we were, you know, trying to get support for our land acknowledgement from our trustees and from the DIC, there was a lot of education and of sharing of resources and references that we found in order to.
Did you encounter any resistance?
I wouldn't say resistance, just questions. I mean, we like to think, you know, we live in a great country, and we'd like to think that we've done a great job for everyone. So it's hard when we find out that maybe there were things that we could have done better, or that we should not have done at all, maybe. So that's hard. But we definitely we counted with the full support of both of those groups in order to move forward. So
good.
Yeah, I think you know, we often were saying throughout the process that like we're trying to welcome discomfort, especially like I'm a white person of settler heritage, so I think it's all right for me to feel discomfort when thinking about these things and talking about these things, and we want to welcome that, and we want to welcome curiosity and questions, because that's how we can like have really important conversations around how we can move forward. And that's also why we're really grateful to have worked with members from the DEIC, because they brought a really great lens to this whole process as well. Well,
I think it's important to try to get the facts of any situation, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. And the fact that you may not like a piece of history doesn't mean that we ignore it or whitewash it. A very famous philosopher said, you know, if you don't understand the history that went before you, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think anybody who's lived any length of time, and as we all know, I'm an old person. I mean, I've been through the cycles 3 or 4 times. And you know, you scratch your head and you say, we didn't learn anything 30 years ago when we went through this. And you know, it seems like the new generation of people who come up are they either dismiss it. We're smarter than they were. No, you're not. We're humans, and it's all human nature, okay? So you really have to understand. what happened in the past so that you can live for lack of a term, I guess, a better life or a more equitable life, or however you want to phrase it going forward, if we don't understand the mistakes of the past. So it sounds to me like that's really what your focus is. You're just trying to make sure that people get accurate information.
That's correct.
That's what
Yep.
we do,
So
the library.
That's what we do at the library, right?
I don't ever think I've ever come into contact with a library that starts out to give inaccurate information.
No.
I hope not.
No, hopefully.
And I'm going to say that that would even include, and you know, we're all people and we all have our biases, okay? So I'm sure that in your research you run across information that maybe contradicts a personal belief or a bias or what. So how do you handle that when that happens?
When we come across information that
Yeah, you may have a particular perspective, and I don't care, it doesn't matter what the subject is, but in your area, you're a reference librarian, so you're dealing with all kinds of information.
Yeah.
So you come across, you know, you were told from the time you were 3 years old that, you know, X plus Y equals Z, okay? And then and so that's firmly entrenched in your mind, and you know, your family has solidified that and has fortified that. So now you're a reference librarian, and all of a sudden you stumble across information that says, you know what, X plus Y isn't always Z.
happens all the time.
How do you handle that? Personally, how do you handle it?
Well, I think that's a tricky question, but I love working in reference and I love working in libraries because they are arbiters of change. Like even just in my own lifetime, the way the library as a space has changed, the way the libraries have
yes.
changed because of the pandemic, the way that library staff have encouraged and also been forced to make major changes to the
Are you old enough to
virtual-
remember the card files?
We didn't, I don't think.
You don't look old enough
I
to
don't
remember
really
the
remember. I know of
I
them,
do
but
remember them, but I was really
you don't
little.
look old enough either.
I know, but I do
Yeah.
remember them. I mean, I remember not being able to see over them, but I remember.
That was a major change when they
I
went to the
know.
computers.
Yeah.
And I know in the Concord Library, they left the card. In fact, I think they still have it.
oh, that's great.
They didn't add to it
Right.
after they got the computers, but I think they recognized, you know, we got a lot of octogenarians that come in here. And if these folks can't find the material in the
Right, right.
card, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're right, things change.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be open to that. I know I'm not right like half the time, right? You know, like
We always
it's,
double check ourselves.
It's important to be open to as many perspectives as possible. It's great to work in a space where I get to interact with people all day because I'm constantly learning. They're asking questions that I might not think to ask myself. So it's
You know, I'm so glad to hear you say that, really, because sometimes the media tries to portray folks that purvey information as single-minded and not open-minded. So I'm very glad to hear that, and I thoroughly expected that answer from you because having lived in this town now for 44 years and knowing what I know about it, and most of the people that live and work here, I find that people are generally pretty fair-minded, you know, as a group. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But I am glad to hear you say it.
Yeah.
That's good. Good.
yeah.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, this is
know,
great.
You were talking more about this, about the land acknowledgement.
Yes.
And you know, is there anything you'd like to highlight there?
Sure. So with the land acknowledgement, we took a class, the department heads at the Chelmsford Public Library took a class in February of 21. It was sponsored by Library Journal, and it was, the title was something like How to Build an Anti-Racist Library Collection. So it was several weeks long. We all got together, did the classes together, did the sessions together. And one of the libraries that gave one of the sessions, they started their presentation by reading their land acknowledgement. It was in a town in Colorado. So that was pretty fascinating to us. And I'd already heard about those before. I thought, wow, that would be really cool. And the other assistant director said, we should have one too. And so it was kind of an idea that we floated around. And then I did ask our director if we could work on that again. If we could really just work on it, and she said sure. And what better way to do it than to use Laura, who worked with us here, and also get with the DEIC, so it wasn't just a library thing, but a town-wide effort. So that's what we did. It took, and they were open to working with us and the DIC, and we had all of our research and discussed things together, and we wrote it and practiced it and showed it and fine-tuned it, and then.
And how long did that process take before you concluded with the finished product?
We had to present to the select board twice. The first time we weren't quite ready, but the second time we were. So was that at the end of January? When we did it the second time? Yeah, so for the second time?
Second time was March.
Oh, second time was March.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel like it was a long time ago. So
If
I
I
want to say
re-
about 6 months.
If I remember correctly, and I think I remember seeing the meetings, I think when you first went to the select board, they were uncomfortable with the fact that they hadn't really had a chance to. In other words, they were
Correct.
seeing it for the first time in their packets. This is like
Yes.
3 or 4 days before the meeting.
Right.
And they said, you know, we really haven't had time to look at this. And I
Right.
think that was probably a fair.
It was, yeah.
Comment.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20,
Oh, sure.
and we
Well,
did.
so you learned.
Yeah, we learned,
Next
right?
time,
And we can make mistakes. We
right.
are not perfect. Librarians are not perfect. We can make mistakes. We could be under, or just could be not ready. And we were, so the second time around, we were ready. This time we did it differently by getting the support of our trustee and presenting to the entire DIC. And we had already reached out, Laura had it right, you had reached out to different people in the Indigenous community, run this by them and all of that. So we were definitely way more prepared and we were really happy with the outcome. So that's where we are now. And then to further, like to work, to build on that first step with the land acknowledgement, we have actually, between the library and the DIC, we're applied for a grant, an AARP Community Challenge grant that we're hoping we win, but it's a grant where we're going to AARP.
Oh,
AARP,
AARP.
yes.
Oh, the old people. Okay.
The more experienced people,
Thank you.
the people
The wise
that
people.
the wise people that we respect and go to for a lot of our information as well. So this is a grant where what we hope to do is install 5 mini libraries. The trademark name is Little Free Libraries, but we hope to install 5 of those throughout the town that will have books by and about Indigenous authors and voices. And also, what did we decide on? Like maybe 15 information kiosks throughout the public lands, the parks, and all the lands that we have here in Chelmsford.
How about the schools? Is that a part of it?
The schools,
That's not a part of the grant, but it's a part of our mission for sure. And
Oh, at some point you'll get to the schools.
yes,
Yeah.
and the schools are they have already reached out. Like one day Carly asked us if we knew of any speakers that someone at the schools asked her, an Indigenous speaker, and we were able to immediately, Laura, to give her like 4 or 5 resources that they can go to. So we definitely will partner with the schools on this. But we want to get people outdoors, get people to visit all of the many free libraries and all of the information kiosks when they're up. And the kiosks will contain the land acknowledgement and information. We actually brought a sample to show you.
Oh, good. So these are printed materials.
Yeah, of our what we call our frequently asked questions.
Oh, good, good.
So we hope to win this grant, and if we don't, we will. Becky has promised to find us other resources
Yeah.
to be able to push through with that, and it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, it was definitely like, a major element for all of us in the working group that we move beyond just the land acknowledgement. It's great to have the proclamation because it does offer people the opportunity to ask questions,
That's
be
a window.
curious.
Right.
Yes, exactly. But we also want to be able to take action and provide pathways for the community to get involved in what the Indigenous communities in Massachusetts are working on and working towards. There's a few land rematriation trusts that are Indigenous-led in the state. So we just want to also connect, the Chelmsford community with the Indigenous peoples that are here and elsewhere in the state. So.
Good. So we have 20 seconds. Plug the library.
Okay, we have so many amazing programs. If you go to chelmsfordlibrary.org and click events, you will see our events calendar. We have compelling questions series that address DEI issues.
We have our pop-up libraries out already for this season, so come and visit the pop-up. We'll be at Friendship Park on, Thursday, but just come and check our website to see all of our